All right, let's take a look at writing an instructional program for a student with beginning math skills. So we're going to take a look at Max. Now Max is a little first grader, and we have noticed an issue as we're doing calendar math in the morning. He struggles to be able to count. He's not really able yet to connect to how many days left until something or how many days since. So what we're finding is that this connects really closely with the coach interview that we conducted, where the family identified that they'd like him to be really working on academic skills so that he can close the gap between he and his peers. And in fact, I'm going to come over here. If we look at the math core for grade 1, notice this: major clusters, support clusters, and additional cluster. The major cluster represent and solve problems in addition and subtraction. That completely connects to what we're doing with calendar math, so I can easily guide this instructional program with this. And in fact, if we scroll down to this one, this is a subpoint that we can organize, represent, and interpret data with up to 3 categories, ask and answer questions about total number of data points, how many in each category, how many more or less are in one category than another. So very easily, we can connect what we need to do with Max with the core. So I can put in the objective is that Max will count to 10 using one-to-one correspondence. And then I can also put connected to core, and then let me just come back here. This would be goal number 1, basically. So I can even write that in. Now, because I'm using his, something more so out of his coach, I don't need to write the whole objective, the 1OA.A, but I can if my goal, according to his parents, really was keeping him within the core. But the functional routine of this, it becomes really important for what we're doing in the class. So I can write it either way. It depends on what the function of this is. Now, in this case, we are also mentioning that the class uses a skill during calendar math time in the morning. But again, when we come back down to generalizing this skill, this is definitely an academic skill set he's going to be using on other things. But right now, the focus is written for calendar math. Now, the idea behind this is it a discrete skill? Is it a forward chain? Is it a backward chain? Or is it a total task? In this case, it is definitely a discrete skill. This is not something that's contingent on something else. It's just it's practicing numbers. When we say how many straws do we have as we're counting out the days since something, it's a discrete skill. So let's think about how we want to break down these skills. Again, there's always different ways we can do it, but let's say what's difficult for Sam is truly identifying where when we say this is 1 straw, he's counting and he's saying 1, 2, 3, and actually we've only put down 1 straw. So there's a lot of guesswork he's doing, which is not uncommon. So let's say that the first thing we want to do is teach him basic one-to-one correspondence, that when we count something, he names it. So we're going to say, again, the goal is to use this during the calendar math, but we're going to be practicing a skill outside of calendar math so that we can apply it to calendar math. All right, and in fact, maybe I want to specify that. I'm going to move that, and I'm going to put this over into his generalization factors, and I'll clean that up here in just a minute. But the functional routine, we're going to say, well, actually, I'll leave it there. We'll move it when it comes time to say how we're going to teach it. Okay. So back with the program steps. And in fact, hopefully you're seeing me model. Some of it you're just talking yourself through. Does this make sense? Oh, no, it doesn't. Where would it make sense? So you're creating these in a way that makes sense to you in order to run them. Okay, so with the program steps, we're going to say, again, we're teaching him up to 10. So what would be the best way to break this up? We could break it up like we did with our language arts one, our literacy one, where we kind of faded out our level of support. We can use what was in our instructional, our math. If you remember, it should look something like this, if I can pull it up. Our educating students, counting objects 1 through 10, this one-to-one correspondence. Now, if you remember, they did kind of lifting up the pen. Let me just scroll down to it. Lifting up the pencils and moving it from one sheet to another. This is giving a kid a clear visual marker that we don't count until we've placed it here. And once this pencil goes over here, we count 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, after reading this manual, we've decided this is what we really want to do for Max. And so we are going to, we can either write it out to be these steps. They list them here: lift and move one pencil to another sheet of paper, say the pencil as it touches the paper. Let's say in Max's case, that's what we've noticed is difficult, is he's just counting all those straws randomly as they're in the air, doesn't recognize that 1 is 1. So we're going to actually write this. We can write this as a chain if we want to, which as I'm talking through, it kind of makes sense. So let's do that. So let's move this over here. We're going to do actually not a backward chain. We can do a forward chain. We can do a total task. I'm just kind of problem solving this through my head with, do we want to introduce the program to him according to steps, using a discrete skill, or do we want to do it in a chain? And in this case, we are definitely, if we use the program, we are using a chain for sure. So let's step this out, and then we'll come down and identify. So the first thing we want the student to do is pick up a pencil. And the second thing is we want them to do is transfer pencil to second sheet of paper. So pick up pencil from first sheet of paper. Transfer pencil to second sheet of paper. And then we're going to say count. How about say the number when the pencil touches the second sheet of paper. Okay, so that could be the program steps. And let's say continue counting appropriate number of pencils. So from 1 to 2 to 3 to 7, 8, 9, 10, that kind of thing. All right, so that would list out our program steps. Now, I might be playing around with this and working with my student, and this part is really easy. What's not easy is maybe identifying the difference between this number and this number. And at that point in time, maybe I'd change my program steps, where step 1 would be I'm working on having him count from 0 to 3, from 4 to 6, from 7 to 10. And then maybe our final step would be from 0 to 10. So I can do this a ton of different ways, but let's say this is what makes sense for Max. Now, if I do this, it no longer is a discrete skill. It's actually going to be a forward chain. Remember now, the backward chain would be that I help him do all of these except for the last step, and on and on. In this case, we're going to do a forward chain, meaning he is responsible for doing each step. Okay. Location or setting, where are we going to do this? Are we going to do this one-to-one, small group? If we're doing, transferring a pencil to get number, this really needs to be one-to-one instruction. This is where obviously he's had errors, he's had time to practice errors. So one-to-one instruction helps us. In fact, if you read the manual and they talk about using the stop sign, you do need a lot of attention being paid to one student, so it would be hard to separate out 3 students at a time. One-to-one instruction during math circles. So this is great because maybe our paraeducators, oh, my need are in there, maybe our paraeducators are working with our other students in other types of settings, and then because we're special educators, because we can design this, we can work one-on-one with students who need additional help. So in this case, Max needs some very direct help on this skill. So what materials are going to be needed? So we need at least 2 sheets of white paper. And maybe what I realize is this student needs a red sheet and a green sheet, so that highlighting the relevant stimuli only counted once it's on the green sheet. So I can do lots of different things with this. Let's say that we have 10 unsharpened pencils. So notice little things like that, like the term unsharpened. Maybe that's important in this case. Maybe I'm using counting bears, all sorts of things. That's pretty much all I'm going to need for this instructional program, so not too hard. Now, what am I going to say here? I'm going to say, Max, count blank pencils. Or I could say, give me 10 pencils. We see that a lot, but they will actually hand them to you, which might be fine for counting bears. You can use, remember some of your Pinterest ideas. You could use muffin cups and counting bears or little snakes. Maybe it's reinforcing. Maybe pencils seem really boring to a kid, but they'll do anything to count dinosaurs. So those Pinterest ideas are coming back in handy here. Okay, count blanks pencils. What is the naturally occurring cue for the behavior? So in this case, it might be when the student sits down because it's math time, might be when they see the pencils, might not be until you actually say it, but the goal is to identify when do they know that, hey, it's counting time. Naturally occurring cue, we're going to say for this student, they know it's time the minute they see the pencils out. Now, you want to be careful because you don't want to overgeneralize this, so every time they see pencils, they feel the need to count. But we can say math center time, and when working one-on-one with pencils. That might be when they're like, oh, okay, I get it. This is what we're doing. Okay. All right. So what is the response for this behavior? It looks like I've usually done my response is in italics, so I'll do that as well. So what do we want the student to do? You know, the idea of performance demands, what are all the different things? So Max will count up to the number given by the teacher. Okay, count the number of pencils. Okay, so we want to be as specific as possible with that. So the reinforcement. Let's say for Max, he works for high fives. He just likes that physical attention. Now keep in mind, sometimes those are hard to fade out. We don't want kids always giving high fives for everything. So we want to be careful with these things that we see. So let's say that he works really hard for high fives. In fact, I'm going to put this down here. Max works really hard for high fives, but we want to how about reduce either the number that he's getting, or we want to kind of reduce this reinforcer so that he works for other things, including natural reinforcers. Therefore, we will have him work from a penny chart, very similar to, so how about we will introduce him for him to work for a choice reinforcer, which includes high fives on every other day. So for example, this is a great way to start taking out some of those reinforcers that we've started to see in a problematic way. This is what I usually do when a student has been reinforced by food for a while. And we want them to get away from everything deserves a food item to let's do some other things like choice activities, or how about just verbal praise, or ultimately intrinsic motivation, but we've got to fade those things out. Food reinforcers are really high. High fives are kind of in the middle, but again, that can cause some social issues. So what we do is we introduce a choice chart where we pick maybe 3 different things that the student can choose from. So all 3 are socially appropriate for us, and I'm only going to introduce that high five reinforcer every other day. What we find is often the kid is not necessarily picking that for themselves every time. We've just instilled that upon them. So that's one way we're going to get, we're going to use our special considerations this time is for the reinforcement. So type, we're also going to say, let's use a penny chart to select items. Select choice reinforcer. See special considerations below. And then schedule delivery. How often are we going to do it? Are we going to do it every time he counts something? Are we going to do it for every set? Are we going to do it for every 5? So this is where we get to decide how many pennies he's going to earn. Let's say our ultimate goal is we're going to let him, choice reinforcer, it keeps taking my R off, that can, let's see, let's put in a maximum time of, let's say 3 minutes per session. So if for some reason our student was picking food, again, I highly caution you against that. But if so, could they eat that within a couple of minutes? If they're picking iPad time, is 3 minutes going to be appropriate? They're going to go pick bouncing on the trampoline in the back. They get to do that for 3 minutes. So regardless of the reinforcer, we don't want them to be using too much time on the reinforcer during that session. So if that's the goal, is that we're hoping that they can go earn 3 minutes of choice time regardless of what it is. We've got to make sure that we give them enough opportunities, even if they miss something once, that they can earn that. So schedule of delivery, let's say that we're going to do, let's say 10. We're going to have them count 10 different numbers, count up to 10. So let's say that we're going to give them a penny, let's see, every other correct response. Okay. Yeah. And so maximum of, so we want up here, maybe we're going to write something 5 pennies must be earned to trade in for the reward. Maximum time of 3 minutes, 3 minutes per session. Maximum time of reward is 3 minutes per session. So again, just notice how I'm coming back in. I'm playing around with this to make it make sense. I'm going to italicize these so you can see the difference between these two and what it's asking for. Every other correct response. And backed up here, 5 pennies must be earned. I'm going to put in here provide 10 trials per session. Maximum reward time 3 minutes per session. Okay, so see how we just kept building and building, and now that makes sense. I'm saying how many we're going to count to. We're going to provide 10 trials, even if I'm saying show me 3, show me 2, show me 3, show me 4, show me 2. We're doing it 10 times. Every other correct response gets a penny. After 5 pennies, they can trade it in for the reinforcer. So it is possible for them to earn the reinforcer every time they sit down one-on-one with you to work. Okay, now again, I might find that this is not nearly high enough, so I'm going to have to change this to every correct response. So this is where we get to kind of play around with this. So error correction, what am I going to do if the student, I say count to 3 or show me 3 pencils, and they just keep on counting, which happens. In this case, with the manual, they have the printout stop sign. They use a stop sign. Let's say that works really well for Max. Use stop sign and say stop if Max goes beyond the number. And we want to actually and immediately say stop if Max goes beyond the number. The goal is not to let them practice errors. So if I say count to 3, I wouldn't want them to be on 7, 8, 9, 10 before I stop them, because they're practicing a chain of row counting. So we don't want them to do that. We want to immediately say stop if he hits number 4. Okay, so at this point in time, how do we want to back up and repeat the cue? Now remember, prompting is going back and providing the level of assistance, considering starting back, all of that good stuff. So what cue are we going to say? What are we going to do to back them up? So let's say this is 3, the number blank, okay? Now we want to back up to the previous level of assistance, and in this case we haven't listed out our prompts yet, but this would work really well to do the whole full physical, verbal, independent kind of chain. So I'm going to say that indeed we're going to do this. We're going to back up to the previous level of assistance and say, what did we say down here? Max count blank pencils. So Max. So right here, we are just going back. We're using the same request that we did automatically. Okay. All right, so let's see if this makes sense. Error correction. Use the stop sign and immediately say stop if Max goes beyond the number. Then what we say is this is the number, whatever, 4, and then we back up and say Max count blank pencils, and let's say that Max was on a verbal where we say, okay, this is 4 or whatever we're doing. We have to go higher than that. So what was the level before where he was successful? That's what we're going to provide. Okay, so as we mentioned here, it's most to least and time delay are typically best during acquisition. We are in that phase of acquisition. This is not a skill that he's forgotten. In fact, we see more of the least to most when we're working with older students because we've worked on these things. Let's say that we're going to do a progressive time delay this time, meaning we're going to start with 0 second and say, show me 1 pencil, and you say 1. And so you're immediately teaching them through not providing them time. Then you go up to 3 seconds, then you go up to 5 seconds. Okay, so we're going to use progressive time delay. That's a great way to teach. In fact, you'll see that used in the manual. So let's say prompt strategy. I'm going to go back over to the website here and just refresh our memory on which prompts that we have access to. And let's talk through them about which one makes the most sense. Okay, it's under building the IP level of prompt here. So let's say in this case, the student does need physical assistance. Partial, the whole idea of like maybe touching his arm to get him to count or moving his finger over, that works. Modeling works. Gesture, so pointing, facial expressions, that works. Verbal prompt works, and independent. So it looks like all of these. Okay, so full physical, partial, model, gesture, independent. So let me pull our ours up and we're going to do full physical. So you can call it partial physical if you want. Gesture. What did we say? Modeling. Modeling, then gesture. Sorry. I've worked with students where gesture sometimes is more of a suggestion than modeling, so it just kind of depends on the kid. You'll be able to notice. And then we have verbal and independent. Okay, so let's get those all over into black. All right, so here what we're saying is that we have a student who could need up to full physical on different numbers based on our baseline. Remember, this is what's guiding us, is what have we actually seen the student, so we're not just guessing at these. And the student actually needed help picking up pencils and moving them over to even understand what we were doing. Okay. Generalization, so how are we going to move away from counting these pencils to actually counting those straws in our calendar math pack, or counting other things like counting bears, or using them for the subtraction? So stimulus factor, so this is where we have to kind of tease this out. What is going to kind of prompt a kid, hey, I need to count this? And then what are they going to do? So let's see, when counting is required, and we can say something like, for example, lunch count. Maybe we're going to say, hey Max, go count and see how many people are ordering lasagna today, right? So we can do some of those things. Okay. Now response factor, we're going to say that Max will count the correct number of items based on one-to-one correspondence. Okay. All right. Special considerations, we wrote that in. We have our reinforcers. So this makes sense. And again, similar to what I had mentioned on the previous one, you might have to slip in more program steps. You might have to come back and play around with your prompt strategy. For example, maybe you'll never have to use full physical. Well, don't write it down if you're not going to use it. You might find that there's an additional special consideration, like never do this right after lunch. It never works well. Or make sure Max and Sam aren't at the same table at the same time. So little things like that, you might come back and keep playing around with this. And once again, just remember, when it comes time to writing up your program implementation summary, you are asked to identify what did you have to change. Maybe it's the reinforcer, maybe it's again, it's the steps. Maybe you realize that you can't do this one as a chain and you need to back it up to a discrete task. So play around with these and let me know if you have any questions in the meantime. Thank you.